So far, Geisler and Turek have dispensed with scholarship, skepticism, and higher education, and then turned to religion for the answers to life, the universe, and everything, and then taken a detour through 5 questions that they claim are the most consequential questions in life, provided you assume there is a God. Followed by yet another detour into the usual trope about all the meaning and purpose that believers supposedly have that non-believers supposedly don't. Well, now it's time to come back from all them detours and get back to the topic of how to dispose of everyone else's religion without undermining your own. Hey there, folks. Bertram, the Barely Bearable Atheist here, continuing our series on the book I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Norm Geisler and Frank Turek. We're still in the introduction, and we got quite a ways to go yet, but it looks like Geisler and Turek are going to stick to roughly the same topic for the next few pages, so maybe we can make some better progress today. Now, we ain't going to get as far as actually disposing of all non-Christian religions, but Geisler and Turek's going to set us up for it by giving us an overview of what they see as the primary competition for Christian exclusivism, namely religious pluralism. Quote, "So which world religion, if any, answers the God question correctly? Does any religion provide the true box top for life? Common wisdom says no, for a number of reasons." End quote. Geisler and Turek kicked off their introduction as if they was looking for some grand, unifying big picture that would give us a comprehensive understanding of all of life. And they kind of beat around the bush for a while, but now they's finally going to come right out and tell us what they's really looking for. But notice, they ain't really giving us what they'd called the box top to the jigsaw puzzle of life. They's just telling us that we need the quote-unquote correct answer to the God question so that we can start filtering everything through an exclusively, spoiler alert, Christian worldview. Because, forcing everything to fit a Christian framework somehow counts as having a comprehensive understanding of all of life. They claim they've got a better answer than all the science and scholarship in higher education, but all they's really offering us is the burden of constantly needing to think up interpretations of life that satisfy a Christian narrative. Talk about your bait and switch. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, because Geisler and Turek ain't got to that part yet. They just setting up for their boss battle against every other religion in the world, and especially against the idea of religious pluralism. They turn to religion for the ultimate answers to everything, but there's a whole lot of religions out there, and they got to eliminate all the non-Christian ones so as their personal God can come out on top. And that means they had to tackle the problem of religious plurality. So what does quote-unquote common wisdom say that Geisler and Turek object to? Well, the first point is that it sounds kind of bad to say that only one religion is true, because that'd mean everyone else is wrong and has always been wrong, which sounds kind of judgy and preachy. Quote, "If one religion were really true, it would mean that billions of religious people from every other religious faith are wrong. And that's a big problem if Christianity is true, because Christianity seems to teach that non-Christians are going to hell." End quote. Gotta love how they soft-pedal that bit about hell. Yeah, Jesus seems to say that no man cometh unto the Father but by me, and Islam seems to teach that Muhammad was a prophet, and Hinduism seems to teach that there's more than one God, but let's not jump to any conclusions now. Geisler and Turek also give a passing reference to the, quote, "a not unfounded fear," unquote, of religious intolerance coming from folks that claim to have the one true religion, which is indeed a fear that has a solid basis in actual fact. But Geisler and Turek are content to just mention this problem and then hurry on to their next point, which is that, quote, "easygoing Americans," unquote, tend to view religion as being like the 5 blind men and the elephant, each thinking they got the whole picture when they only have a part. By this view, no one religion has all the answers, and everyone's free to pick whatever religion they like, which is an attitude that Geisler and Turek find pretty annoying. And to be fair, this is a genuinely vexing problem for believers. False religions and mythical gods ought to be no competition for one true religion and an actual honest-to-God almighty creator who loves us and wants us to be saved by faith in himself. If there actually was one true religion like that, it stands to reason we wouldn't even have any concept of religion. It'd just be reality. Here's the earth, there's the ocean, look up there's the moon, and over here's God. False gods wouldn't be any more of a problem for us than false moons are for astronomers. On the other hand, granted that religions in general can't all be true, it's entirely possible that they's all false. And if and they was all false, then we'd get a situation like what we have today, where there's a bunch of different religions all teaching different things, and none of them really stands out to everybody as being clearly superior to all the others. Folks would just have to pick a religion based on their own personal preferences and then just decide to call that the one true religion. And just like anything else based on popularity and subjective preference, you'd be able to rank the various religions by popularity and declare that whatever religion comes in at first place must be the right religion. But that don't mean it's true. It just means the majority opinion had to pick something, so they picked that one, true or not. Plus, it'd be kind of embarrassing if the most popular religion also happened to teach that the majority was always wrong and only a tiny minority of folks was actually going to be saved. Oopsie. So religious pluralism is going to be a problem for Geisler and Turek, and they's introducing us to it here so as they can try and address it later on. And we'll see then how far short they fall. But religious pluralism ain't the only problem they's fixing to tackle. Quote, "The second major problem with truth in religion is that some pieces of life seem to defy explanation. They don't appear to fit any religious box top. These include the existence of evil and the silence of God in the face of that evil." End quote. And here we see Geisler and Turek's bias and agenda coming to the fore. The problem of evil and the problem of divine hiddenness and various other plot holes in the gospel story are problems that are particularly difficult for Christianity and religions like it, but they're not universally a problem for all theistic religions by any means. If you got a pantheon of gods, including good gods and bad gods and in-between gods who's all generally capricious and indifferent to human affairs, there ain't any conflict at all between your religion and the evil we see in the world. I'm sure Geisler and Turek have any number of clever theodicies all ready to go to try and explain why God don't stop little kids from being abused and murdered and such. But they setting up the problem in a way that gives a false impression that Christianity is only suffering from issues that's common to all world religions. And that just ain't true. But moving on, there's one more Goliath that Geisler and Turek would like to summon onto the battlefield before they counterattack. And that's the ancient nemesis of all religions, science. Quote, "Finally, many modern intellectuals imply that any box top based on religion wouldn't be legitimate anyway. Why? Because, they say, only science yields truth. Not only has evolution removed the need for God, they say, but only what is testable in a laboratory can be considered true." End quote. Now, here I think that Geisler and Turek is sort of telling on themselves just a little. I mean, look at all them dog whistles in there. Who's the bad guy here? Quote unquote, modern intellectuals. You know, them fellers that's all full of themselves and thinks they smarter than all the rest of us. Don't you just hate those guys? And look, they believe in evolution, too. That's a sure sign of spiritual depravity. And they's unreasonably narrow-minded. They reject the existence of everything that don't fit into a test tube. Can't you just see 'em sitting in a lab full of bubbling beakers and arky-sparky electrodes, all filmed in glorious black and white to the accompaniment of corny, overly dramatic orchestral music? Mwah. Now, Geisler and Turek really know better than that. They know that astronomers don't work in labs full of actual stars and that volcanologists ain't got test tubes with full-blown active volcanoes in them. No actual science would ever say that the only true things are things that can be tested in a lab. But that's beside the point. What Geisler and Turek is trying to do here is to put as negative a spin as possible on the fact that we all seen over and over again that science gives us more informative and reliable explanations of how the real world actually works than religion does. And that's going to be pretty annoying to you if you're trying to claim that your religion is some kind of supreme infallible authority for telling other folks what's true and what they have to do about it. And let's be real clear here. There's tons of believers out there that ain't got any problems at all with science. And on the other hand, I ain't saying that science and religion never have any conflicts either. I'm just saying that there's a ton of folks that has separate compartments for religion and for science. And they ain't got no problems with the fact of evolution and the reliability of the scientific method. But however many believers there may be that are like that, Geisler and Turek ain't among them. And in fact, they think it's wrong for believers to be on such good terms with secular science, at least outside of the laboratory. They want folks to think that religion, and specifically their own religion, is the ultimate supreme authority that trumps everything else, especially science. So they're spinning things as hard as they can here to try and poison the well against scientific inquiry into important questions. But before we continue, I want to digress for a moment and talk about the question that Geisler and Turek ain't ever going to ask, and that's the question, how come? How come science gives us answers that's more informative, useful, and reliable than any other source? And the answer is that religion and science have very different ideas about what it means to, quote-unquote, explain something. Religious explanations are simple attributions. You see something you don't understand, so you attribute it to some invisible, unverifiable, supernatural person or force using basically some kind of magic to produce whatever it is you're trying to explain. And really, all that does is affect how you feel about things. There ain't no useful information in there at all. You just attributed something to some kind of god or gods, and now you're more inclined to listen to folks who claim to speak on behalf of them god or gods and obey what they tell you. Or at the very least, you at least feel satisfied that you've quote-unquote answered the question, even though it ain't really an answer, it's just more of a superstition. Which is why different religious folks come up with different answers, and there ain't no objective way to decide which of them, if any, has the right one. Science, on the other hand, is all about making verifiable observations and comparing different hypotheses and testing them to see which hypothesis best fits the data. When science explains things, it does so by going into detail about specific cause and effect relationships that we can examine and verify. And that's very useful information because once we understand these real-world cause and effect relationships, we understand the real world better, and we can see ways to put that knowledge to practical use. And even more important, we can put our conclusions to the test at any time and modify them as needed to get an even more accurate understanding of the real world. Science, in other words, gives us informative, verifiable explanations with a built-in mechanism for revising and improving our understanding as more information becomes available, whereas religion can only offer superstitious attributions that have to be maintained as dogma no matter what new information comes in. And the thing is, there ain't no particular reason why we couldn't use the same verification-based approach for religion as we use for science, except, of course, for the fact that the scientific approach to religion leads to answers that apologists don't like. And that's why Geisler and Turek try and poison the well against science and claim that scientists arbitrarily reject any kind of quote-unquote truth that don't fit inside of a test tube. It's a classic straw man setup. And now that they got that guy all stood up, they's ready to ask a bunch of rhetorical questions framed just the way they like 'em. Quote, "So where does all this leave us? Is the search for God and for life's box top hopeless? Should we assume that there's no objective meaning to life and each invent our own subjective box top? Should we be content with the professor's 'I don't know' answer?" End quote. Now you see how much spin they's adding here? They got us searching for, quote, "God and life's box top," unquote. And it's the same search, singular. To find the box top that gives us a unified picture of all of life, we have to find God, or so they'd have us believe. And the only alternative is to just assume that life has no objective meaning. We ain't allowed to look at the real world and find objective meaning without God. That's not allowed for some reason. It's all black or it's white. We either search for God or else we just assume that there ain't no objective meaning. And to hear them tell it, it's the scientists of all people supposedly telling us that there ain't no objective meaning to anything, as if objective meaning weren't the whole point and substance of science. Granted, science may not give them the kind of meanings that's going to satisfy their personal preferences and desires, but ain't it better to have a meaning that's verifiably true than to just invent some kind of unrealistic, fantastical meaning that's more to our own personal liking? And of course, Geisler and Turek is all set up and ready to give us their own particular answers to this ideological dilemma that they've carefully constructed, which we ain't going to get into today. But based on how hard they've worked on setting up all the poisoned wells and false dichotomies and straw men that they need for their argument to work, I bet their answers are going to be some real doozies. And I'm sure that there's lots more that could be said, but that about wraps it up for me for today. Thanks for watching, and please be kind wherever possible.